The vertical bar chart, or column chart as it's also known, is a very popular chart. Indeed, it's the one I end up using the most in my dashboards. So why is that? It is a chart with a wide range of application. We can use it for categories, we can use it for time series, composition, and distribution. So it has a wide range of application. Let's take a look at an example of how we might use this in the context of a HR chart, human resources. Imagine we want to count the number of employees, but we want to break it up by category. So in our example, we might say each of these bars is a department, and we want to count the number of employees by department. So in this example, our x-axis would be department, and I'll just use shorthand for now. We've got department there, and then our y-axis would be number of employees. So a very simple way we can start looking at this and how we could use it. You could see the wide range of application it would have. So some things that we want to do with this type of chart. We want to direct label, in so much as our software or the BI platform we're using allows that. So what is direct labeling? Direct labeling is where we can put the number or the value directly above or on the bar. Now, of course, if I put it on the bar, you're not going to be able to see it because I've got a black pen on a black background. But in your tool, you would make the contrast work for you. You'd probably do that in white. So we don't have to look from the right over to the left and look at the axes and the number. So we can save people that time. They can just look at the bar and look at the value above the bar. So direct labeling, when we can and as often as we can, it is a best practice. We want to order sensibly. So we don't necessarily want, a kind of haphazard sizing of the bars here. Generally speaking, when it's this type of visualization, we want to order by size. And that makes the most sense if we're taking this example for the HR by department. However, we might also want to highlight something. We might want to draw the user's attention to it. And in that case, the ordering mightn't always work. We might want to use color, where we're going to color one of these bars a different color to draw the user's attention if we think that's important. Another thing we need to be keeping in mind of is the axes and managing the axes. More often than not, we want to start our axes at 0 and work our axes up to whatever makes sense in the context of the data being shown. Sometimes, however, we might need to zoom in to what's going on in the detail here. We might need to go right the way in, because when we look at our axes from 0, maybe there's just not enough detail, not enough nuance going on there. So we need to zoom in. When we do that, in the title of our chart, we need to let them know in the subtitle that we have skewed the scale. Right? So in case they don't know, we're just informing them and letting them know about that. Some things to be aware of what we need to avoid whenever we have long labels. So the space that we have here is quite reduced when we're using this type of visualization. You can see sometimes people have to go with a 45-degree angle in order to fit something in. Now, this is a case where you might want to look at a horizontal bar or a different type of visualization if you're ending up with very long labels, because it tends to be a bit hard to read those 45-degree labels, as well as it takes up a bit more space. So there may be a more optimal way that we want to consider using our labels. Just by virtue of this being a bar chart, we don't need color to apply meaning necessarily. We can, but usually it's a good idea to start with everything in a gray and then see if it works, and then really only introduce color when we want to highlight something. We want to bring someone's attention to a certain particular bar. The more color we end up using all over the place, the harder it is to draw someone's attention to anything that we might want to highlight as important. Another thing to avoid is making this 3D. Of course, we want to try and avoid any kind of 3D. It just doesn't add any particular value, and it can obscure things. So if in doubt, always go with 2D. There's very rare application where 3D is going to make sense, especially for a bar. It's almost never going to make sense. Finally, but this is one of my biggest tips for this type of chart, is to avoid horizontal scrolling. If you start seeing yourself where you got all these tiny little bars going on, and the only way you can see most of them is if you have to scroll, right? So you end up having to do a scroll. It's a very poor user experience. You might want to explore other alternatives for visualizing that type of data. Maybe it's not the right thing you're supposed to be visualizing, or alternatively, maybe you want to work in some different chart patterns, chart combinations. So you might have 2 or more charts working together to realize what's important in that data. So that's a quick overview of the vertical or column chart with some of the applications of how to use it and the do's and don'ts. And as you can see here, what we always want to do with our charts is to make sure that we're answering some key business questions, right? So you can make sure you know what question you're answering, right? So it's always good to give a bit of detail about that, as well as what actions you're going to be taking and under what conditions. Once you satisfy those, it's going to be much easier to make sure that you are actually coming up with the right type of visualization for what you're trying to do.